She bought a child out of iron with her last silver. By morning, hoofbeats would surround her gate. September held the valley tight and dry. Wind dragged straw across the auction yard and made the blacksmith's sign groan like a door that never quite closed. Marin Hale, a widow with a roof that learned to leak in August, tied her old mare to a post and counted the last silver in her palm. 6 coins, 3 coppers, and the bone needle she never sold. Enough to fix a hinge, not enough to fix a life. People crowded the sheep pen where the auctioneer had set his table. Ledger, stamp, a pitcher of warm water. 2 wolfers leaned on their rifles and watched the crowd the way coyotes watch a schoolyard. Beside the post stood the lot nobody should ever name a lot. A native child, maybe 9. Dark hair cut blunt. A narrow face that didn't plead. Thin iron cuffs bit at both wrists. A short chain ran to a door hinge bolted through raw plank. Bare ankles dusted white. Around one wrist, a twine bracelet with a single bead the color of creek water. Property found trespassing, the auctioneer said, voice bright as tin. County will not board what it can't employ. He tapped the ledger as if numbers had a conscience. Bids began the way they begin for cattle. A laugh at $2, a joke at $3. Someone offered to buy the cuffs only. The crowd liked that more than it liked anything else. Marin lifted her hand and showed the 6 silver on her glove. Not high enough to pose, not low enough to pretend she didn't mean it. A few heads turned. The bankman on the porch smirked. "Widow's got a soft heart," he said to the judge. "Loud enough for a story to grow legs." No one topped her. The gavel tapped with a dryness that sounded like a bone against wood. A clerk reached for the chain, as if a sale permitted touching. Marin stepped between and raised her palm. "No," she said. She did not raise it again. She took a small knife from her belt and cut the leather loop that kept the chain padlock from pinching skin. The key lay on the auctioneer's table. Nobody had offered it. She took it without asking and turned it once. The cuffs fell open with a plain sound, metal on ground, no angels in it. The boy did not flinch. He watched her mouth the way people do when they understand half the words and all the meaning. She wrapped his wrists with the torn hem of her apron. The fabric was clean enough. The wolfers laughed under their breath and spat where they could see the spit land. The bankman made a note in the air and went back inside. Marin gave the ledger her name. The letters looked thin on the page and still true. They walked out together past men who liked to watch exits. Marin kept to the road's hard center where wagon ruts did not pull a person down. She did not touch the boy unless a wheel rolled close. He did not touch her at all. When they reached the bottom of the lane, she told him her name. The way you tell a gate it can stand open and not be ashamed. He said nothing. He didn't know her a word. Her place sagged at the edge of the flats. 2 rooms, a lean-to, a windmill that forgot wind, 2 cows that remembered how to be patient. The well rope had a new splice. Last week she'd learned how to loop it so it held. She put the kettle on and kept it there until water learned to move. The boy stood near the door where he could see both corners of the room. He looked at the roof seam, the chinking, the places light got in where it shouldn't. He wasn't measuring comfort. He was measuring exits. She cut bread. 2 narrow halves, even though one wanted to be bigger. She set one on a plate and rested the knife beside it, blade away from the edge. The boy watched the knife more than the bread. Then he took the bread with both hands. He ate without sound. He left a last bite and slid it back toward her, eyes on the table, as if debt should never be allowed to sleep. She broke that bite in 2 and put half back on his plate. He did not argue. He ate it the way free people do, slow enough to taste. Steam fogged the small window. Outside, wind pressed the grass flat and then let it go again. Marin poured water into a tin cup and set it so the handle faced the door, the way a right hand would find it in the dark. The boy took the cup and held it like heat could be taught to stay. After a while, a word found him. "Thanks," he said, soft and careful. A borrowed coin returned clean. Then he tried her name and almost made it. His own he gave low, not quite a gift, more like a fact set on the table with the knife. It was a short name shaped for running, the kind people use when they need sound to move fast. She set it back near enough to write. He nodded once, approval small as a moth. He studied the windmill tail from the doorway, then the bucket, then the rope. He walked to the well and put both palms on the crank the way you put both palms on a question. The rope rasped and the bucket rose, water heavy, the splice taking strain without complaint. He lifted it to the trough and poured without spilling. He looked at the cattle and the cattle looked back and decided not to be afraid. They worked without a sentence to explain any of it. Marin mended a split rail with a willow brace that would hold until spring. The boy scrubbed the kettle with wet sand until the bottom shone like riverstone. He braided the frayed end of her halter rope into something tidy. She tried to pretend she knew how already, and failed in a way he respected. Dusk came down like a blanket that didn't mean warmth. Marin pulled an extra quilt from the cedar chest and folded it once, twice until it looked like an offer, not a command. She set it near the stove. The boy shook his head, pushed it back toward the bed with the back of his wrist and pointed to the floor. A small smile found the side of his mouth, not to charm her, only to tell the truth. You live here. I'm passing through. She set the quilt where she had put it the first time. He left it there and sat near the door with his back to the jamb. Before sleep, he reached into a small pouch she had not seen and pinched out a crumb of dried green. He dropped it in the kettle. The room learned a new smell, wet stone after rain, a place where you can hear your own heart without being afraid of its noise. He poured a little into the tin cup and passed it to her first. She drank because the right answer to kindness is sometimes simple. Night thinned the sounds until the house had only honest ones left. Somewhere near midnight, the latch lifted and settled again. Marin sat up without letting the bed complain. The door was open a hand's width. Outside, the boy stood in the yard, head turned north as if the wind carried a voice with his name in it. He lifted a palm in the air, the open shape she had used at the auction. I see you. I am not a trap. It fit his hand better than it had fit hers. He stepped into the tall grass and the grass folded around him and acted like it had never been touched. Sleep tried and failed. Marin lay with the quilt over her shins and listened to the wind decide what kind of cold it would be. The stove eye dimmed from orange to dull red. She counted the boards in the roof seam and the breast between coyotes and the number of times a woman can choose to be brave before the word begins to wear thin. Just before dawn, the ground changed its mind. Not thunder, not cattle. A long, low tremor, like someone turning a heavy page in the earth very slowly. The windmill tail ticked once without wind. A spoon on the table moved a finger's width and stopped. Hoofbeats far, then nearer, walking, not running. Calm the way a river is calm when it has already decided where it is going. Marin swung her legs to the floor and slid her feet into boots. She tied her hair back with a strip torn from an old shirt. She checked the water, the door bar, the place where the yard narrowed, the corner where a person could stand and not be seen. She did not reach for the shotgun. A shotgun tells one kind of story. She needed another. She opened the door to the first gray of morning. The cottonwoods at the creek were only ghosts. The ridge was aligned with teeth. The sound thickened, spread, became more than one line of travel. From the east, from the north, from the wash where spring flood eats the bank. She stood with her back to the hinge so the door could choose what to do without her. When light finally touched the far slope, it touched feathers first, then the curve of pony backs, then faces tilted enough to read a yard at a glance. They came down the rise without hurry. Not a charge, not a parade, a circle learning where to stop. 50 riders, maybe more, and none of them looked at her first. They looked at the horizons. They looked at the well. They looked at the chain lying where she had dropped it, iron already taking dust, a useless idea cooling in a clean yard. They did not surround her to take. They faced the prairie and let her house breathe inside their ring. They came off the ridge without hurry, ponies stepping neat, feathers still. Light slid down their shoulders and found rawhide, bone, painted wood. They did not point spears at the door. They did not flood the yard. They made a circle the way a hand cups a flame in wind. Horses stood nose to tail. Eyes watched the horizons, not the widow on the porch. Marin let the latch hang, one palm open. She stood where a person could be seen and not block the way. The chain lay in dust beside the step, iron already dusting over, idea turned harmless by air. The boy was not with them at first. The circle took its shape before he appeared. A rider with hair the color of winter grass eased forward until his pony's shadow touched the lowest rail. The man's coat was buckskin, mended with mink. At his throat, a bead string showed creek colors and sun. He looked long at the well, at the rope splice, at the patched hinge on the door. He tied a loop of twine with a blue bead to her gatepost. The knot sat high, neat, with a turn that rain could not pull tight. He tapped it once, as if to wake the wood. Riders dismounted in pairs and in silence. One took a deer haunch from a travois and laid it on the step. One set 2 water skins by the trough and waited until her cattle were done, before any pony drank. A woman with gray at her temples worked the bucket and tested the rope's cut with her thumb. She slid a coil of grass between hook and iron, saving where no one else would have noticed in time. She met Marin's eyes only after the work was useful. Then she lifted her chin the width of a bean. Approval enough. The boy came from the cottonwoods with a woman whose braids reached belt leather. His wrists were wrapped now, linen traded for soft buckskin. He carried Marin's tin cup, polished with snow, handle right. He set it on the table and turned it the way a right hand finds it in the dark. He did not cross the threshold. He stepped back to stand inside the circle's shadow. Relief made him taller. Fear didn't need the room anymore. No one asked a question that demanded speech. The old woman brought a bundle of wild onion. She set it on the sill and moved away. 2 girls placed a crossbar over the porch stones and laid a black iron pot as if a stove had sprouted legs. A thin boy checked the door's lower hinge and tapped a sliver of willow in to head off next winter's draft. The work said what mouths did not. We saw what you did. We make your place hold. Marin cut the first meat and salted it thin. She cooked with the door open. She gave back what had been laid down. A hand would appear at the bottom step. Scarred, beaded, young, old. Take a slice, nod once, retreat to shade. When the boy reached, she tilted the plate so he took the largest piece and split it clean for the gray-templed woman before the bite reached his mouth. The small lesson landed where it needed to. The county found its nerve late. A buggy jolted up the lane with the deputy at the lines. 2 men clung behind, hats forward, eyes sharp with the kind of courage people borrow from each other and spend too fast. They stopped at the fence and tried to stare down a circle that had been staring at horizons since before their fathers learned what dusk can do. Marin did not step aside. She did not close the gate. The deputy held one hand up and turned his face toward her, not past her. You safe? He asked, voice low. Not for show. She nodded. A child was cold, she said, simple as water. The man with winter grass hair rode forward the length of a breath. He touched the blue bead at her post, then the rail, then the ground between buggy and gate. The deputy read the sentence without knowing its language. He tipped his hat and turned the horse. The 2 men behind made a sound and swallowed it when nobody gave it back. After that, the circle breathed deeper. Riders drifted where angles were weak. 2 posted at the cottonwoods. 1 watched the roof seam as if weather left notes there. No one faced her door long. No one tried to enter. The ring faced the world and asked it to behave. Near noon, 3 riders came down from the north, the way coyotes come to chicken wire to measure it. Long rifles laid across their bows. They tracked farther than sense recommended. The winter grass man did not signal with his voice. He lifted 2 fingers and the line turned just enough. Nothing shone. No one shouted. The 3 riders felt the shift land on their skin and pretended they had meant to veer east. They went. No laughter rose to chase them. The day wore on in work small and exact. The gray-templed woman walked the seam where floor met wall. She stuffed clean grass in holes a mouse had hopeful plans for. A boy with coyote eyes mended the head loop on Marin's halter with a bone wedge so the tear could not start again. 2 girls cut willow switches and taught her hands to lace them between rails to stop wind from speaking inside when January chose its worst. The boy placed a ribbon of blue clay on the stove's lip, and the room learned rain again. Marin moved through it like a person in a church that had thrown out its benches and kept all its prayers. She lifted the deer, turned it, portioned it. She scrubbed the table the way a woman scrubs when she is not alone. She found herself putting tools back where a hand could find them without hunting. The small order calmed her like full water in the trough. Toward evening, townsfolk came on foot and stopped at the fence because the fence still meant boundary even when it sagged. The schoolteacher held a slate under her arm and worry in her jaw. The storekeeper's wife had a jar of salt in her bag and a picture of herself as a person who did not change her mind. Both looked at the bead, at the ash line the winter grass man drew with his thumb, at the way riders watched for storm, not for property. The teacher lifted 2 fingers and pressed them to her heart. The winter grass man returned the shape. The women left smaller than they had arrived, which is not the same as less. When the sun went soft, the riders drew tighter by the creek. Horses dropped heads to crop. Fires sparked low. Sentries kept their saddles. The winter grass man untied the bead and tied it higher. The knot changed by one turn. He took a coal from a saved ember, ground it between his fingers, and drew a short line on the post, straight, then a curve that met it and kept going. He blew the dust away and looked satisfied with what the wood knew now. Only then did the boy cross the circle. He set a small packet on Marin's table, wrapped in doe skin and tied with grass cords spun new. Inside lay a cake of blue clay and a strip of smoked meat folded once. He did not linger for her thanks. He stood in the doorway and looked at the corner of the yard the winter grass man had been watching all day. Marin saw it at last. Empty ground with a good wind and a bit of shade. A place where a coop would live or a bench. A corner where shirts could learn sun. She carried 2 boards there without announcing a plan. Night came clean. No flames walked the ridge. Owls took their shift. The circle shortened to a half ring so backs could rest behind wood instead of armor. The gray-templed woman stepped inside the house 1 pace only to turn the cup handle right and to touch the spot on the table where a last bite of bread had once sat between them. She nodded at the kettle and went back to the air that knew her name. Marin banked the fire. She walked to the gate and laid her hand on the bead like a person finishing a prayer without words. She touched the coal curve and felt grit. She did not own that mark. It still felt like hers to keep. The yard smelled of wet ash and cooked deer and clean rope. She slept because the body understands circles even when the head is too tired for lessons. Before dawn, she rose and hammered 2 nails into the bench frame she had started. The sound was small and good. The wintergrass man watched from the cottonwoods and did not ride in. He nodded once, the gesture slight and full, and turned his pony to the far bank where a trouble path crossed. He and 3 more posted there before the light learned color. When the first thin sun laid itself along the rail, the boy's mother came to the gate with a wrapped bundle. She lifted it so Marin could see without reaching. A child's dress, doe skin soft, beadwork fine but spare, 2 wrist wraps tied to its belt. She set it on the post beneath the blue bead, not as payment, not as purchase, but as a thing that used to belong somewhere alone, and now belonged at a gate where people looked outward first. The old woman said 2 words that sounded like kept safe. Maybe they meant remembered, maybe they meant both. The valley's news would say warriors stood guard around a widow's house, and the county did not stop them. That was true and too small. What happened was a circle learned her yard and let it breathe. What happened was a gate learned a language of knots and ash. What happened was a boy carried a cup back polished new and set it where a right hand could find it without looking. And what shocked the town, though it would take them days to name it, was how easy all that looked once it stood there. What shocked the town was not anger. It was order arriving on horseback, quiet as bread. Dawn laid a thin blade of light along the top rail. Frost took a breath and let wood show through. The circle shifted from night shape to day shape without a word. Riders loosened cinches, checked hooves, swept ash from blanket edges. The gray-templed woman raked last embers into a tidy heart and covered them with sand that knew its job. Marin set the kettle. She moved slower than fear and quicker than doubt. The boy, clean wrap at his wrists, hair combed smooth with fingers and water, stood by the door and watched the yard the way a person watches a page he is finally ready to read. They did not call it a council. They made one. 4 elders rode to the gate and tied their reins in the same knot the wintergrass man had shown the post. Extra turn, rain won't pinch. They stood in a square as simple as table legs. The wintergrass man set a short staff upright in a hole he pressed with his heel. A blue bead hung from a thong at its top and swung once and decided to be still. At first they faced outward, as they had all night. Then they turned inward, not to circle the house, but to include it. A space opened where a person who owed explanation could stand without being pushed to the edge. Marin stepped into it because the right place often looks like a risk. She laid the cut chain in the dust, each link straight, not in a heap. She put the key from the auction beside it, teeth up so the morning could see the little shape that had undone iron. The boy's mother set a bundle by the chain, cuffs of soft buckskin for winter, a child's shirt stitched with patience, a sprig of something dry and sweet that made the air remember rain. She touched her son's shoulder, and then the scar on her own hand, and then the gate, and that was a sentence finished. They waited for the county because a story laid straight works better if the page is wide. Deputy Hale arrived first, alone, hat pulled down against a wind that had teeth. He looked at the staff, at the bead, at the key on the ground, at Marin's boots dusted with the same dust as everyone else's. He nodded once and took his place just outside the square. Law where law could listen. Others came because news cannot sit. The teacher with chalk dust on her cuff stood beside Hale and did not speak. The storekeeper's wife came without the tight mouth she wore the day before. She carried a ledger because hands feel safer when they hold something. Two wolfers slunk to the far fence and pretended to be part of the horizon. The bankman took the porch, eyes already arguing. The winter grass man lifted one palm and lowered it. The circle sat with their saddles under them and made a ring of quiet. The gray-templed woman stepped forward and laid 3 objects in the dust. A child's cut hair bound with twine, a ring torn from a leather collar, and an iron tag stamped with a number that did not belong to people. She looked at the wolfers and then at the bankman, and then at no one at all. She touched the tag, then the river on the survey the teacher had drawn from memory last winter, the line that showed where boys had been taken and where the road learned to forget. Her thumb pressed the paper until the print stayed. Hale's jaw set and then eased. He moved his boot so that when he stepped forward he would not crush the tag into the dirt by accident. The bankman laughed in his throat, a dry sound that used to work on rooms. No one took it. He said trespass and property and order in an order he liked. The winter grass man did not answer him with sound. He pointed at the open chain, then at the boy's wrapped wrists, then at Marin's name inked yesterday in the auction ledger. The circle looked at the bankman the way weather looks at paint. Hale spoke low enough that even the horses had to choose to listen. "We can take men who trade in what the county won't name," he said. He did not look at the wolfers. He looked at the ground in front of them where their boots had scuffed a nervous half-moon. "Bring them to the court," he added, almost to himself, as if the floorboards in that room might finally learn a straighter step. The 2 wolfers did a small math and came up short. They swung for saddle and found 5 riders already between them and the gate. No rifles lifted, no rope showed teeth. The riders simply existed in a line that said not that way. The wolfers chose town, where a man can hide in noise, and walked there under their own hats with Hale behind them at a distance that promised to shrink when needed. What shocked the town began next. The winter grass man and the gray-templed woman lifted a rawhide shield between them. Its face held a painted curve like a river that learns to meet itself. They set it against Marin's post beneath the blue bead. The old woman pressed 2 fingers to the coal mark from last night, then drew the same curve beside it on fresh wood. The winter grass man spoke to Hale in a voice that had seen too many winters to raise itself. Not treaty, not threat. Terms of being neighbors a place could live with. The terms were not the ones the porch expected, not money, not cattle tallies. They named her gate kept. They named her well shared when summer forgets. They named the lane between Cottonwoods and Porch Safe Road, a strip where children on small legs could pass with cup or message and not be taken for anything else. They promised riders at the ridge when the wind smelled wrong and asked in return that when town men took boys with numbers around their necks, the county would be told, not only the bank. Hale answered with the little nod that binds a man more than his hat brim ever can. Then the tribe did the thing that knocked the air out of the porch. They brought horses, not a gift to buy favor. A herd raw-boned, winter-ready, 20 heads pushed into Marin's corral with the easy grace of animals that knew grass under snow. A boy no bigger than the freed child led a dun with a back like a shelf and eyes that did not argue and put the rope into Marin's palm. The wintergrass man touched her wrist with 2 fingers, then the gate, then the shield's painted curve. The circle's meaning stood there without translation. You opened iron, keep open water, we tie our watch to your post while winter stands. This dun eats at your trough and carries your day. What you did is now part of our work. Marin had nowhere to put shock, so she put it into the way she took the rope. Careful, both hands. A small bow of the head like thanks should be given the way bread is. Broken and shared, not shouted. The boy looked at the dun and then at her and then at the well, and a line of worry left his mouth. The bank man found a word that had served him many seasons and tried to spend it. Debt. But it bounced. The teacher opened her ledger and wrote 3 lines. Gate kept, well shared, safe road. She underlined the last and left room for names. The storekeeper's wife took the lid off her jar and passed salt to the gray-templed woman as if hands remembered something they had forgotten to do for a long time. Hale came back with the Wolfers and 2 constables. He did not make a speech. He did not put hands on the riders. He took the iron tag and the clipped hair and the leather ring and set them in a canvas bag with the county seal. He asked Marin if she would tell the court where the chain fell and who kept the key from pinching. She said yes. The boy's mother laid her palm flat on the table once and lifted it. Hale looked like a man who had walked a long way with a small stone in his boot and just now found a place to sit and take it out. The circle stayed through noon. They ate the bread she made on a skillet that finally learned to heat even. They fixed the windmill tail so it remembered to listen. They laced Willow through the rails until Drafts had to work for any chance. They showed her the knot that lets a rope hold hard without cutting its own throat. They cut no hair. They took no board. They left no orders on her table. By mid-afternoon, shade had a shape and work had a good tired in it. The winter grass man retied the bead higher once more, using that turn that rain respects. He touched the shield's curve and then pressed his palm to the coal mark until a smudge lived there like ink. The gray-templed woman stepped inside one pace to turn the tin cup handle right and to lay a twig of the sweet dry plant on the sill. She looked at Marin's hands and at the boys and at the rope on the dun and smiled that hard-won smile that passes between people who have both been poor in different languages. They left in 2s and 3s, not a parade, just weight moving off a floor that had learned it could carry it. At the creek bend, riders split the way water splits when it finds rock. Some north to read the ridge that like to misbehave, some south to stand where winter sometimes sneaks a fire in. The last to go was the winter grass man. He pointed once at the corner of the yard where the bench frame waited and lifted his chin that fraction that means finish it. Marin answered by picking up the hammer before his pony took 3 steps. When the dust sat down, the yard did not lose its shape. The blue bead held light like a small, kept promise. The shield's curve made the post look like it had always wanted a story. 20 heads moved in the corral, chewing with the steady confidence of animals that had decided to stay. The dun rubbed its jaw on the top rail and then stood as if practice had begun. Neighbors would say, "War party guarded a widow's gate," and they would not be wrong, only late to the point. What had settled around her house was a way of living that refused to burn as quick as grass. The part that shocked everyone needed no translation and used no threat. They tied their watch to her gate and asked the county to do the same. It looked like courtesy. It was law made the old way, by hands in daylight, with enough eyes on it that it would be hard to forget. Marin watered the dun, then set the cup handle right and laid the knife with the blade turned away from the table's edge. She lifted the boy's wrist wraps and retied one with the knot she had just learned. He watched her fingers and relaxed a fraction. Wind moved through the cottonwoods and decided not to brag. The house made its honest noises. The gate knew its name. And the morning that had arrived on hoofbeat left behind something heavier than fear and lighter than pride. A kept place, marked in blue and coal, where a person could stand and not be alone when the road remembered to send trouble. The porch sent paper at her. The gate answered with bead, coal, and people standing where wind breaks. Cloudless noon burned flat. Flies traced slow circles at the corral rails. The bankman finally left his porch and sent his weapon instead. A deputy clerk with a blue ribbon packet and a mouth that liked to practice victory. He rode a fresh bay and stopped outside the coal mark as if paint could stain a saddle. He read without looking up. Writs, levies, seizure for stolen stock, and harboring. Words heavy in town rooms sounded thin against open ground. The circle did not close. The winter grass man let the clerk finish. The gray-templed woman stood with her palm on the staff at the gate. Marin kept both hands visible. The boy stood by the dun and watched the clerk's cheek, where pulse betrayed a man who trusted paper more than eyes. Hale arrived at a trot, dust blowing from his cuffs. He read the ribbon and said nothing for a long breath that made even horses settle. Then he asked where the judge's seal was. The clerk tapped a red stamp that liked to pretend it mattered. Hale looked at the shield with the painted curve and at the bead tied high. He pointed to the coal mark. "My court is here until the road behaves," he said. He did not raise his voice. The clerk swallowed and tried to smile. It hung on nothing and fell. They made a table from 2 sawbucks and a plank. The teacher opened her ledger. The storekeeper's wife set down a jar of salt without knowing why her hand had done it. The gray-templed woman placed 3 things on the plank: an iron tag with a number from a collar, a loop cut from that collar, and a twist of hair bound in twine. She pressed each into the wood and left marks a person could feel with eyes closed. Marin brought the auction ledger. Yesterday's line carried her name and the child's description, written in the sheriff's letters, not the bank's. She laid the key beside it, teeth up. The page did not look brave. It looked true. Hale put his palm over the stamp the clerk waved. He did not smear ink. He just let the paper feel weight it had not met yet. The wintergrass man added his piece, a strip of rawhide painted with a clan sign and a short braid threaded through a bead like the one on the post. He touched the child's wrapped wrists, then the well, then the lane between porch and cottonwoods. He spoke 5 words in his own tongue and one in English because it fit. Kept, shared, safe, witness, here. The clerk found his courage in the worst place and spat the word trespass. The circle did not flinch. The gray-templed woman turned the tin cup handle right on the table and slid it to Hale. He drank and put it back with the handle right. The teacher waited for someone to say no. No one did. She wrote a line. Gate kept. Well shared. Safe road. She underlined the last and made the space for signatures wider than habit. The clerk tried a new angle. Stolen horses, he said, pointing at the dun. A boy from the ring, no older than the freed child, walked into the open and lifted the dun's mane. A small cut scar showed where a brand had once burned wrong and been erased with ash and care. He set the hair back and looked at the sun as if asking it to remember. The clerk looked at his boots. The argument lost air. They did not arrest anyone that hour. They wrote names instead. Hale signed the ledger. The teacher signed. The storekeeper's wife signed and wiped her eyes as if wind had chosen that moment. The wintergrass man pressed his palm beneath the lines and left a print like a river bend. The gray-templed woman drew a small curve under it and set her 2 fingers there as if to anchor a map. The bankman sent something meaner at dusk. Wolfers slid along the creek in 2s with rope and a smell of grease and old smoke. They reached for the gate at the corner, where night likes to shorten courage. The bead turned dark blue. The coal curve caught starlight and looked like a blade. The circle moved the way good water moves, not loud. 5 riders stepped from shadow into moon and made a line before hands found children or knots found wrists. No rifle raised, no horse pawed. The wolfers looked at the line and then at their own legs and discovered they worked best walking back to town. They went. Hale, who had waited in the cottonwoods because he understood where stories try to cheat, met them at the road with rope and a calm request. They learned how quiet can feel like iron. Wind shifted at midnight and brought a different danger. Heat rode it. Someone had kicked a spark down in the draw and wished the rest to flame. Marin smelled resin and a memory of old roofs catching. She and the boy lifted wet sacks from the trough. The gray-templed woman scraped a bare line with a shovel where the grass hugged the porch. 3 riders lit a backburn with a strip of punk and walked it slow. The big flame arrived, saw its own small mirror running at it, and hesitated long enough to lose its hunger. It took the route the riders had chosen and ran out of sentence against a cut bank. When it was done, the yard lay pale, the shape of an egg in a pan that never learned to blacken. Morning found work waiting where fear had slept. Marin hammered 2 nails into the bench frame in the corner the wintergrass man had nodded to. The boy sorted bent nails from straight and made a small army of useful ones. The gray-templed woman brought a flat stone with a lip and set it on Marin's table. She tapped it twice. It rang like a thing that will hold heat. 2 men cut clay from the creek. The ring built a small oven over a mound of sand. The stone disappeared inside the dome like a seed under soil. Sani kneaded meal and water until the dough breathed back. When the dome blushed warm, she slid around onto the stone. First bread lifted sweet in air that had smelled of smoke all night. Hale came at midday with the judge. Coat off, sleeves rolled. They held court on the plank again because rooms felt wrong after the night. The judge looked at the bead, at the shield curve, at the coal mark, at the oven that had not existed yesterday. He read the teacher's line and added his name under it, the loop in the J careful for once. He took the bankman's writ and wrote void here across the red stamp, in a hand the porch would never forgive him for. The bankman did not ride out. Paper kept him brave where floors echoed. He sent a note instead that asked who would pay for all this order. Hale set the note under the hot iron kettle without looking. The ink warped and ran. The paper still existed and had lost its posture. Afternoon turned kind. 20 heads moved slow in the corral. The dun learned Marin's hand and the boy's whistle. The oven cooled enough to touch. Sonny broke the second round in half, gave the larger to the gray-templed woman, carried the smaller to Marin with both palms up, then split that again and set a piece on the plank for Hale. He took it with the same care he used for a badge he didn't need to show today. When shadows lengthened, the wintergrass man tied the bead higher again and added a second color beside blue. Dull bone white, small, a ring of it through the knot. He pressed his thumb to the coal curve and left another smudge. He touched the staff and lifted it from the hole. The hole kept its shape. The air learned to keep it too. They would not stay forever. They did not need to. The shock had traveled the town and spent itself on faces that had to choose what to be next. The circle's gift was not horses or bread. It was a rule anybody could see at a glance and remember with their hands. This gate is kept. This road is safe. This water is shared when summer forgets. It had weight like a good skillet. It had room for use. Night came gentle. Coyotes tested a note and lowered it. The dun breathed slow and easy. Marin turned the tin cup handle right and set the knife blade away from the edge because houses keep temper when small things face the right way. She sat on the new bench and felt it hold. The boy leaned his shoulder to hers in the quiet way people do when a day fits. The bead did not shine. It glowed the way creek water glows when moonlight decides to be patient. Far on the porch, a lamp burned longer than law needed. The judge's name drying under the teacher's line made that light look thin. Paper had met the gate and learned a different grammar. The valley for once understood it without translation. First frost thinned the riders to a handful, but the bead stayed bright. The valley waited to see what remained. Cold came clean. Grass wore sugar at dawn, and the windmill's vein clicked like a metronome, teaching patience. The ring did not vanish. It narrowed to a watch of 6 who traded nights, faces steady, ponies sure. The shield with the painted curve leaned against the post beneath the blue bead and the bone-white ring. The coal mark had blurred under weather and fingers, and then settled into the grain the way truth does when it decides to stay. The county finished what the yard had started. Hale walked the wolfers to town without rope and brought them into a room where the judge set plank on 2 barrels and called it a bench, because benches are what law needs, not rooms. The iron tag, the braid of cut hair, the leather ring, those lay on the table with the teacher's ledger and yesterday's bread crust and told more than speeches. Men who thought paper lived alone found it married to hands. The court kept no flourish. It kept names, and that was heavier. Work took the daylight while words dried. Marin and the boy set posts where the winter grass man had nodded, and the coop learned to throw a square shadow by noon. The dun carried buckets as if born to axes and water, stopped where the trough asked, stood while the boy retied a slipknot he had twice made wrong. Sonny showed him once more, slow, her thumbs finding the tuck, then watched him do it until the rope admitted it had learned. They baked 3 rounds that day, the first for the watch, the second for Hale and whoever came up the lane with an empty hand and a useful question. The third, Marin broke in her palms and laid half on the sill because some doors like offerings better than locks. Blue clay gave the kettle its clean rain smell. The tin cup handle faced right. The knife blade faced away. Small things obeyed, and the house breathed easier. The bank man sent one letter and then another. He received an answer, a page signed by judge and deputy and school teacher and storekeeper's wife, and the winter grass man's palm that printed a river bend. The letter did not scold, it described. Gate kept, well shared when summer forgets. Safe road between cottonwoods and porch for children and messages. Writs void when they pretend not to see. The bankman's lamp burned past midnight anyway. Lamps sometimes die slow. Snow threatened and then thought better of it. The watch shifted farther up the draw. On the last morning before true cold, The tribe came in full for the first time since the day of Ash. A line of riders in winter shirts, braids tied firm, faces set for a kind of speaking that does not raise dust. They stopped in a wide arc and let silence clear the path. The winter grass man carried a staff wrapped in rawhide and feathers the color of creek water at dusk. The gray-templed woman wore a bone comb and the look of someone who had waited to do a precise job. They made no altar. They used the gate. First, the boy's mother stepped forward with him at her side. She placed his right hand in Marin's left and then set her own palm over both, holding there through one full breath, then two. Her eyes did not ask. They measured whether the choice already made could survive winter. She touched the well rope, the oven stone, the coop door that swung true, the shield's curve. She said a word that sounded like between. She tied a narrow band of soft hide above the boy's wrap and a twin band around Marin's wrist. Not binding, a promise with room. The wintergrass man nodded as if a line had been drawn on a map and found good ground. Then the old woman took a small pouch from her belt and shook two kernel-sized stones into her palm. One blue as the bead, one dull and warm like bread crust. She pressed the blue into the coal-marked post where the curve drew its path and pressed the brown into the oven's lip. She turned the tin cup handle right and tapped it twice as if blessing hinges. She spoke 4 words that needed no translation. Kept, shared, safe, witness. She pointed at the staff, then at the gate, then at Marin's boots in the dust. A smile cracked and held. Hale and the judge stood just outside the ring, hats low, not for weather. Hale held a folded paper with the court seal and waited for the quiet to say yes before he spoke. He did not make a speech. He read one sentence and set the page on the plank already scarred by coins and salt. The county recognizes the kept gate, the shared well, and the safe road until spring hearing. And after that, if winter says so. The teacher signed. The storekeeper's wife signed with a hand that had found a better job than counting. Hale signed last. He cut his name plain. Shock came for the porch only after word reached it that nothing could be taken on the lane between cottonwoods and door without a line of faces reading your hands. Men went to sleep believing in a kind of quiet, then woke and found a different one. It did not bite, it watched. The watching proved enough. That evening the watch thinned to 2. The wintergrass man tied the bead higher one final time and slipped a third ring through the knot, a hair-thin circle of hammered copper that caught no light and still held it. He pressed his thumb to the coal curve and left a print so soft it felt like wood, remembering being a tree. He touched the boy's head and the dun's neck and the gate in the order a day uses, then turned his pony toward the creek bend. The line lifted and began to right itself away. Sonny stayed until Stars wrote 3 bright commas over the ridge. She mended the boy's sleeve and stitched a tiny blue bead into the inside seam where only skin would know. She checked the coop latch, the oven's mouth, the braid on the dun's hackamore. She put her fingers on Marin's wrist where the soft band sat and tied the simplest knot. One a tired person could loosen with one hand and no teeth. She said thanks because some words belong in every language. She climbed up at last and left without looking back, as if she knew Marin would stand there anyway. Winter settled proper. Breath showed. Boards popped. The watchfires moved to the ridge and left faint circles of soot where grass would green first come spring. Hale's red square at the road bleached to rose and then to the color of dust. Nobody needed its shouting now. The judge's name on the teacher's page lost its fresh shine and kept its shape. The bankman's lamp went out when oil met bottom. Lamps are obedient like that. Marin learned the dun's small likes and the boy's big silences. He learned the oven's temper and the way her hands folded rope. They both learned where the coop door creaked and how to keep it humble. They walked the safe road between cottonwoods and porch twice a day, once empty-handed, once with a pail or a message. Children from town tried it in pairs, carrying slates and questions. The lane held. When snow finally came, it settled featherlight. The windmill turned slow, lifting water that had no reason left to hide. The shield at the gate wore a thin cap of white. The blue bead looked darker and near. Marin baked a round and set a small piece on the sill for whoever needed feeding without asking. The boy breathed on his palms and saddled the dun and brought kindling from the draw with a grin that belonged to nobody else, and also to more than one home. On the last night before the year learned a new number, the valley gathered quiet at the fence. No speeches. A fiddle heard itself once and stopped, because frost doesn't love strings. Hale stood where he could see both cottonwoods and oven. The teacher counted children under her breath and lost track, because counting works better in rooms. The storekeeper's wife broke a loaf with the gray-templed woman and laughed the short laugh that means a person recognizes her own hands. The winter grass man returned alone at moonrise. He carried no staff. He stepped to the post, touched the bead, the bone ring, the copper ring, the coal curve. He looked at the bench, at the coop door hung true, at the dun with its ears telling calm. He turned to Marin and to the boy and spoke a name for her, not the one the ledger kept. He said it only once in his own tongue, then again in a shape English could hold. Keeper of the gate. He did not ask if she liked it. Names that fit don't need permission. She set her palm on the post below the curve and held there until her skin warmed the wood. The boy lifted the tin cup and set it in her other hand, with the handle right. He stood close enough for shoulders to touch and far enough to flee if a thought needed room. He did neither. He stayed. The winter grass man swung up, patted the dun's neck as if reminding it to remember 2 sets of feet in 1 yard, and rode toward the creek bend. He did not look back. People who trust circles don't. Morning after that tasted like new bread, though the oven had slept. Marin opened the door and watched 2 lines in the snow, one from town, one from the bend. They met at the gate and curved along the safe road to the porch. She took the boy's hand, soft band warm under her thumb, and they stepped into tracks that had already decided where to go. The valley never wrote it on any map. It didn't need ink. A bead, a curve, a lane between cottonwoods. Those told enough. When riders passed, they touched the post with 2 fingers. When children ran, they ran in the road that kept them just by being itself. When water forgot, it was reminded. And when the quiet asked what remained after the ring rode away, the house answered the way a kept place answers, with work that fits, with bread that breaks easy, with a name the gate had learned and would not lose.